I'm an extremely outdoorsy female and love to spend a lot of time in nature. I spent the better part of my early 20s living in remote northern locations and exploring a lot of Alaska, the Yukon, and British Columbia. I've had many odd, frightening, and bizarre stories that came from my time in the north, and this is one of them. In the summer of 2012, when I was 22, I was living and working in a pretty remote town in northern British Columbia from May to September. The place I worked at was a campground in a provincial park on the Alaska Highway, 4 hours north of Fort Nelson and 2 hours south of the Yukon/British Columbia border. I feel like it's an incredibly Canadian thing to describe distance and time. The best part about this park was the fact that it had beautiful natural hot springs, which attract tourists from all over North America every summer. I lived in an old trailer on a separate part of the campground where the rest of the staff lived. I quickly got used to living in a place where I had no running water, no electricity, no cell phone service, no internet, and driving 4 hours to Fort Nelson every 2 weeks to get groceries and to do my laundry. Life was pretty sweet. I got to hike, go for late night dips in the springs, make some traveling friends, and spend quality time in nature getting to know the flora and fauna of the landscape. My job at the campground? Park facility operator, which was general maintenance and cleaning of campsites, gatehouse attendant, and wildlife interpreter, and sometimes I had a few security shifts here and there. The feeling of living in the woods was much different than the feeling of living in a city, as far as safety goes. In the city I'm from, there are many people around. You are aware of the fact that your house or apartment could get broken into, but emergency services are quick to respond and neighbors are also a plus. However, in the woods, I felt more vulnerable. The closest police were 4 hours away and I lived in a trailer that was run down enough that it could easily get broken into. Plus, it was really dark and anyone could sneak around easily at night. I was already on edge sleeping every night. The trailer next to mine was abandoned by the previous manager of the campground after his son had tragically died inside of it. The previous manager had promised numerous times that he would hire a company to drive up from Fort Nelson and tow the trailer away, but that never happened. Not while I lived there at least, and nobody seemed to care about it too much. I went into the trailer once and saw the aftermath of everything, and never went in again. Back in the 90s, there was also a fatal bear attack at the hot springs. We all had to read the incredibly gruesome and detailed police report about it for our bear aware training. So yeah, unsettling to say the least. One night, at probably around 2 in the morning, I'm asleep inside my trailer and I am woken up to a very loud banging on my trailer door. Reasonably shaken, I look outside the window next to my bed and see a car with its lights on and 2 men standing at my door. I can feel the blood drain from my face. This is the moment I've been scared of the entire summer. Through the door I say, "How can I help you?" And one of the guys, clearly hammered out of his mind, starts rambling on about something. No matter how hard I try, I cannot understand what he is saying. I say, "Sorry, I don't understand what you're trying to tell me." And the guy starts frantically trying to explain something in the same drunken state as the first guy. I decide at this point that they don't mean any harm and I open the door to talk to them. They look visibly shaken and I can tell they are desperate for my help but don't have the mental capacity of a person sober enough to coherently tell me what's wrong. One of the dudes starts telling me a very long story that I managed to piece together through all of his slurring and hiccuping. Basically, he says that he and his friend are on vacation and came up from Fort Nelson to party. They had a really long drive. They were at the hot springs. They were having beers and they were sorry about having beers. They weren't drunk, clearly, and then he drops the bomb that somebody is running around the campground stabbing people. I look at the guy telling me the story and I notice he had blood all over his clothing. I say, "Somebody's going around stabbing people?" And he replies, "Yes, somebody is running around stabbing everybody." Then the other guy yells, "Come on, let's go," and they hop in the aforementioned car and speed off before I can question them further. Now I'm standing at my trailer door in the darkness alone, thinking there's a maniac running around wielding a knife. I have no phone, and I know that the only person who has a phone is the ranger, and his cabin is about a 5-minute walk away from my trailer. I remember that I have a radio, so I run inside my trailer, lock the door, and try to get to the ranger on the radio. His radio is off, of course. The only thing I can do at this point is to go to the ranger's cabin and notify him of the situation. I slip out of my trailer and run into darkness across the maintenance grounds, past the creepy trailer that dude got killed in, through a thicket, and straight towards the ranger's cabin. Every single noise I hear from the surrounding forest is making my heart pound faster. I keep imagining this maniacal man sneaking through the bushes, entering people's tents and slashing everybody like some bad horror film. I get to the ranger's cabin and pound on his door. He enters within a few minutes, visibly sleep deprived, and I tell him the whole story. While I'm there, he calls the police and they tell him that they are on their way and they will be there in 4 hours. The ranger grabs his gun, walks me back to my trailer, and says, "Don't let anybody in." I stay up the rest of the night, listening for any sort of disturbance around me. The intense kind of listening where you're concentrating so hard on any external sounds that might be made that you almost feel deaf from the silence. After about 2 hours of doing this, my trailer starts rocking back and forth. I freeze. My heart stops. I can hear the sound of someone breathing extremely heavily, and I'm thinking, this is it. A knife-wielding maniac is going to murder me, and this trailer is going to be another one they have to tow away. I'm just sitting there on my bed, in my trailer as it's rocking, waiting for the maniac to stop tormenting me and just break the window and stab me. I'm still listening intently to the heavy breathing, and that's when I hear a grunt. A very non-human sounding grunt. I get a feeling that it's not what I think it is, and I peer out the window of my trailer. It's a freaking bison. And it's scratching its back on the side of my trailer, causing it to rock back and forth. That's great timing. The RCMP get there at around 6:30 a.m. and proceed with their investigation for 10 hours. They close off the springs, and the entire campground turns into an episode of CSI. We don't hear anything about what took place during the night until the investigation is over. Apparently, there was a guy at the springs who made a lewd comment about one of the females in another group, which resulted in an argument. The guy disappeared and returned an hour later with a knife, stabbed 2 of the guys in the group, and booked it back to Fort Nelson. Not before stopping in my trailer with his buddy to tell me about the incident, of course. Yeah, one of the guys at my trailer, he was the dude stabbing people. My guess is that he and his friends stopped by my trailer to make it seem like they were innocent. Drunken logic. The 2 guys that were stabbed survived, which is good. For many days following this incident, I was cleaning up blood-soaked clothing and rags from random places all over the campground. This happened about 6 years ago now, when I was 20 and living in a shared flat while at uni. I had a job in a gig venue/dive bar about a 30-minute walk from my flat. I typically walked or cycled to and from work, despite finishing at 1 to 2 a.m. or later. The city I was in was pretty small, and my walk took me through crowded, well-lit areas, so my only issues walking home at night were generally dodging drunk people throwing up outside bars or getting harassed by people I know trying to get me to go for a beer. One night I was on my way home and about 15 minutes away when a group of 6 or 7 guys who were walking down the street in the opposite direction started catcalling me and shouting at me to join them for a drink. Not a totally uncommon experience, so to start with, I just laughed and waved them off. Then when they kept persisting and started to get ruder and louder in their shouting, I flipped them the bird and told them to screw off. They shouted at me a bit more but kept walking their direction, and I figured they'd given up and carried on towards home. A few minutes later, I stopped to fix my shoelace and realized that the same group of guys were now following me, but they were completely silent now. I was apprehensive but not too nervous at this point. I naively thought that maybe they changed their minds about where they were going, even though they basically did a full-on U-turn and were now heading away from the bars and clubs, like me. I picked up some speed and kept towards my flat and rang my flatmate to see if she was home, and she wasn't. When I got to the end of my street, I turned off the main road and started running, hoping to get inside before they reached the road and saw where I lived. I thought I'd made it, but when I reached the door, I looked back and saw them gathered at the end of the street looking at me. Now, the building was an old Victorian house that had been converted into flats, pretty common for the area. Ours was on the ground floor, and our living room and my flatmate's bedroom looked out onto the street with big bay windows onto a little front garden. The building wasn't in the best repair. The main door into the stairwell had been warped, so it no longer locked. You just had to shove it closed, and the building manager had been refusing to fix it. Anyway, I was inside the flat at this point, grabbing a beer and telling my flatmate's cat about the creepy guys that followed me. Don't judge me. I wanted some kind of company. I went through to the living room and just about passed out. They were in our garden and the living room curtains were open. They were pointing and waving at me and laughing. I had no idea what to do, so I backed into the hallway out of sight, at which point they started banging on the window and shouting. This went on for like 5 minutes while I debated whether to phone the police or not. Then the banging stopped and I heard more laughing. I looked out and one of the 2 guys had dropped his trousers and was jerking off in front of the window. When he saw me, he started pressing himself against the glass and shouting about all the things he'd do if I went outside to join them. I then realized a few of his friends were missing. It became quickly clear that they had shoved open the broken main door and were now slamming against the door to my flat. At this point, the cat is going absolutely insane. I'm furious and terrified and have no idea what to do. I settled on grabbing a heavy frying pan and positioning myself in the hallway where I could keep an eye on the door when I called the police. The police, bless them, turned up within 5 minutes, and as soon as they saw the lights, the guys took off. And just as well, because it turned out the door jamb had started to splinter. There were also some really nice quote-unquote gifts left on the living room window. As far as I know, they never got caught. I can't really bring myself to think about what might have happened if the police had taken any longer and the guys had got through the door. So this was winter 2008 in mid-Missouri. I don't remember what the month was, but there was just a little snow on the ground behind the bushes I ended up hiding in. So it was definitely winterish. It was pitch black outside, so it was probably a new moon. Maybe someone can chart that. I lived with my mom and dad in a 3-story house at the time. The first story, or 0 story as my dad liked to call it, being a finished basement that I essentially lived in and almost never emerged from except to sleep in my room on the 3rd floor. I was always either in the basement or on the 3rd floor. And putting it lightly, I'm really glad I wasn't on the 3rd floor when this story went down. My dad was out of town on some kind of business trip. He's a doctor, so I'm honestly not sure what kind of trip it could have been. It's hazy, but that doesn't matter. The main thing is my mom and I were alone in the house, which was extremely rare. I was also a teenager and thus a smartass, so I convinced her to watch what was at the time my favorite movie, which was Saw 3, and my mom, I love her to death, is a tiny and often timid woman, though very strong and powerful when it counts. I'm not knocking her. So I knew we'd probably start watching in good sport, but abort the mission before long and make me turn it off. Still, I thought it would be fun or funny or something. I was a dumb kiddo, you know how it is. So of course, I want to watch the movie in the basement instead of the living room, not just because it was my habitat, but as I told her, a good horror movie deserves a basement. Again, I was just being a silly kid, or maybe not so dumb in this case. The only way into our basement was behind a pretty big hefty door that was just off a hall from the living room on the 1st floor. Basically, if you walked into the house, you normally wouldn't notice there was a basement door at all because it was off to one side. I say normally because in this case, there were a lot of sawing noises coming from that door. So my mom is performing admirably, really above and beyond the call of duty because we're in the middle of the scene where Carrie is strung up and has to dig for a key in a vat of acid. I'm feeling so proud that my mom is staying still for this, but in retrospect, I'm thankful she didn't give up and run off. Maybe she was about to, I don't know. But she stayed until it came time for us to leave. Right when Carrie started fishing in the tank of acid. Keep in mind, this is a very loud movie, screaming and all of that. I think I hear the door upstairs slam. I think. Nah, that's ridiculous. But a half second later, I realize there are footsteps above us, and my dad is in another state. Somehow I don't panic, but I probably waited a little too long trying to listen. At the time, I thought I heard 3 people, but footsteps are hard to judge. They just kind of marched around, from what I heard, but what I heard was very short because as soon as I realized what was going on, I told my mom we had to get out. The basement had a back door with lighting on the outside wall, unfortunately. I was concerned about the lights when we were leaving. I remember being worried whoever was upstairs might be able to see us when we ran out, but I decided to not turn the light off, thinking it'd be more obvious if that side of the house went dark when we ran out than it would be if we just scampered with the light on. It was around 11 p.m. I think so, totally dark except for the lights in the basement and on the back wall of the house. The house next to us was empty, for sale, and the house on the opposite side couldn't have seen anything because it was up on a hill. Point being, I got my mom and convinced her to run out into the dark and hide behind some bushes, but there was nobody around to help us immediately. I called 911 the second we got behind the bushes alongside the house, but I remember I went silent on the operator right before I could give her our address, and she was saying something repeatedly while I had the phone down trying to pretend that I wasn't there. I noticed the light around the basement exit get brighter, like somebody had opened the door. Because someone had opened the door, and to the best of my ability, I counted 4 shadows absolutely tear out of the basement at top speed into the woods behind the house. As I told the cops when they got there, very rapidly and in full force. Kudos to our town's police, by the way. I thought I saw 4, but they rushed out so fast, there could have been 1 or 2 more, or maybe less. This happened in my hometown when I was 7. Female, 36 now. For context, I lived on an island off the coast of Washington State in a military town that is among one of the safest places to live in all of the US. But of course, weirdos are everywhere. Timing is vague for me, but since I was outside playing with my friends, it likely was a summer evening just before dinner time. We were screwing around, riding our bikes in the street, running around, and doing the usual kid stuff when a car pulled up and stopped in the middle of the street. I don't remember exactly what the man driving it said, but he must have beckoned me over there because I know I walked close enough to hear. He asked me if I had seen any other kids wandering around because his were missing. I noticed then that there was also a woman in the car with him, so I assumed she was the mom and he was the dad. I said no, that I hadn't seen any kids wandering around, but there was a park nearby around the corner and he might be able to find them there. The man then asked if I would be willing to get in the car and show them where this park is. Although I didn't understand just how dangerous this was, I was well aware of the whole stranger danger thing, so I said no. He asked again if I would please get in the car and help him find his children at the park, and I said, no, sorry, can't do that. But I gave him directions to the park, and then I skipped off to continue playing with my friends who were standing there watching the whole time, and he drove away. A few minutes later, my mom came outside to call me for dinner, and I bounced happily up the driveway to tell her I'd helped someone. I was very excited to have done this for an adult, which will bring me to my final point at the end of this. And then I explained the whole thing to her. Her face changed a bit, but she was just nervously saying, "That's very nice of you, hun." And I felt a surge of pride. And then my dad came home. Solid Navy dude, black belt, used to be in a pararescue, and so badass that Chuck Norris checks under his bed for my dad every night. And my mom obviously told him what happened. His reaction was much different. He told me that although he was proud that I liked to help people, I was never ever to approach anyone I didn't know like that ever again. He said, and I'll never forget this, and have since passed this wisdom on to my own daughter. Remember, adults should never be asking children for help like that. He told me I was lucky I hadn't gotten snatched and to always remember it because they could have lost me forever if things had gone badly. He was very stern, which hurt my little ego, and I lost a tiny bit of innocence that day. Now that I have had 30 years of knowing my dad, he was only stern because that is his reaction, and also anger when he gets scared. Poor dude. Before that I had escaped as a toddler and was found on a cliff in Japan. And then I left the yard another time in San Antonio to sell my coloring book pages door to door. To wrap it up, I don't remember if my parents did anything with what I told them, but it's almost 100% likely they did because they are solid, loving folks. To my knowledge, however, nothing ever came of it, and I never heard about any instances like that again. When I was a young teenager, back in the fall of 2006, my neighbors, my family, and I started having bizarre encounters with an old man in a dark red minivan. Back then, I used to live on a hill above an old, non-operational fishing village. It was about a 40-minute drive outside of the city along a highway. The highway to the village was a dead end. There was nothing down that way except housing. There weren't even motels or any stores. Most of the houses were homes to elderly people, while the others were abandoned fishing stages that overlooked the water. It was very strange to see anybody that we didn't recognize down in the area, especially from September till May. We would get the odd tourists during the summer months, but never from fall to spring. When I was in middle school, every day after I got home off the bus, I would walk up to the mailbox. It was a good 15-minute walk along the highway. The mailbox was up the road towards the city. Past my house, there were only about 8 other houses, all on the same side of the road as mine. After those houses, it was just thick trees and marshes. I used to call the area Silentville instead of Silent Hill. We were right on the very edge of the East Coast, right by the ocean. It was a fog bank all year round. It was rare we would get any sunny days at all. Even when it was sunny in the city, it was still foggy down there. Sometimes the fog was so thick you could barely see a few feet ahead of you. Anyways, one afternoon after school, while I was on my usual trek back home after checking the mailbox, I heard the rattling of a vehicle in the distance. I always walked facing traffic since my mother would have a fit if I didn't. Safety rules and all. It was crawling towards me, its headlights clearing the fog. It was probably going about 5 miles per hour, which was odd considering the speed limit was about 70. The minivan came to a halt about 10 feet ahead of me. Just stopped right in the middle of the highway. I continued towards it. I figured it was somebody looking for directions. As I neared the window of the car, I could see an old man sitting in the driver's seat. He was of a fairly small build, with light gray patches of hair on his head. His eyes were very watery and of a dull blue color. "Hello, young lady," he said in a very soft voice. "Hi," I responded. He started making small talk with me. I can't remember about what, but it was just sort of casual talking, you know? I noticed he had a small fluffy white dog in his passenger seat. The thing that really struck me odd about this dog was its body language. You see, this old man would move his hand a lot while talking. Every time he would quickly move it, his dog would sort of scrunch further back in his seat. It seemed a bit afraid of him, if you will. Another odd thing was that he kept his other hand between the two seats. I could sort of make out what seemed to be something of a metallic material under his hand. After chatting with me for a bit, he slowly turned his head away, then continued up the road towards the city. I shrugged it off, just figuring he was a relative of someone down in the village, and continued home. About a week went by without seeing him, and by then he was just a memory. I was on my way up to the mailbox when I heard the familiar sound of rattling coming down the road towards me. Him again, I thought. I was a little weirded out by him, so I jumped down into the ditch and hid in the brush. I watched as he sluggishly drove by. The entire time he was looking around, observing, sort of like a hunter looking for prey. After he was long out of sight and I couldn't hear his vehicle anymore, I jumped up from the ditch and hurried my way to the mailbox. The last 6-minute stretch of road had no housing, so it was pretty isolated. After snatching up the mail, I started hurrying back, and that is when I ran into him again, in the worst place possible, the long stretch with no houses. This time he was coming up the road quite fast. I didn't have time to hide. He pulled up next to me and said, "Hello, dear. Why were you down in the ditch earlier?" Oh shit, I thought. He had seen me. "Oh, I thought I had seen a cat down there," I said. "Oh, so you like cute animals? You can get in the back seat and play with my puppy. She loves kids, you know," he said, smiling. No thanks," I said as I started to walk away. He reached out of his window and grabbed my arm. "Please, I insist. I can even drive you home. You live at insert my address, right?" I stood there dumbfounded. How did he know which house I lived in? I shook him off and started to run. He started backing his car up after me. I bolted down the road and didn't look back. At the time, my aunt lived a few houses up the road from my house, so I ran into her driveway and started frantically banging on her door. She came to the door and let me in. I used her phone and called my mother to come pick me up. After we got home, I told her everything. She was very upset, obviously, and called the police. They basically told us that they couldn't do anything, especially since we didn't have a license plate number. After that, I wasn't allowed to go on walks. He continued to show up, usually like twice a week, right after my school bus dropped me off. He would come driving slowly down the road. One day my neighbor asked him what he was doing. He responded, "Oh yeah, I'm just a lonely gentleman. I saw a woman one day down the road working on her garden and she just captured my heart." My neighbor told him she was married. He just laughed and said something along the lines of, "If you want love to work, you have to work for it," then drove off. My neighbor got the license plate and called the police. About 40 minutes later, the police came down, but he was long gone by then. Our neighbor waved the police over and talked to them. They told him the car had been reported stolen a few months back. Sometime during November, my parents were out in the evening doing yard work. He stopped in front of our yard and was asking my parents where I was. He said he missed our time together and felt neglected. My parents got really upset and chased him away. A few days later, I was up late at night playing on the Xbox 360 in the den. The den was on the bottom floor. I used to keep all the blinds open with the lights off in the room. I liked looking at the night sky. People could probably see me through the window since it was facing the street. So there, I was illuminated by the TV, all cuddled up in my big armchair having a late night game session, probably about 2 a.m., and I see the familiar red minivan slowly coming down the road. I froze. It parked a few feet up the road from my property, in between our house and the house next door. There was a small driveway that led to nowhere going in between our land. He stopped his car, turned it off, then came out. I watched in horror as he walked closer to our house. I was terrified. I pushed myself as far back into the chair as I could, hoping he wouldn't see me. I felt like screaming, but my parents were upstairs and both were sound sleepers. He paced back and forth in front of our house, sort of staring. He was looking into the den. Now, this is the extremely strange part. He just stopped in place and then laid down on the side of the road in front of our house. He laid there for like a good hour. I was frozen with fear the entire time. After about an hour, he finally got up, strolled back to his car, and left. I ran upstairs crying and told my parents. They called the police again, but he was gone by the time they got to us. We were all frustrated. The police, despite having his license plate, couldn't do anything, and this guy was coming around, harassing and terrifying us and our neighbors. This went on till about March. About a month passed without seeing him, and that is when we got the news. Our neighbor, who was good friends with somebody that lived down a dead end, side road up a bit further, had been on a walk to his friend's house. He spotted the red minivan off in a driveway of a house that had just been put up for sale. The people were moved out. He got filled with anger when seeing it and ran over. When he got closer, he noticed the blood on the passenger side window. He went to the closest house and used their phone to call 911. He went back over to the car to check it out. He was pretty ballsy. He was sort of the neighborhood protector. The car doors were unlocked. He looked in the window to see the small dog's body, a wallet which had an ID in it, and a bloody wrench wedged between the two seats. He left and waited for the police to arrive. Our neighbor stayed in contact with the police. Apparently the guy had left in a hurry, leaving his ID behind. Turns out he had just been released from prison not too long ago for offenses towards minors. We didn't get any details though. I felt so horrible for the dog as well. I really hope he never got his hands on another animal again. I sometimes worry that he went on to harass other people the same way he harassed us. When I was a kid, we moved a lot, mostly because my father was a scammer, always trying to manipulate workmen's comp and disability and bankrupting our family with get-rich-quick schemes, which of course never panned out. We were always behind on rent, and I remember my parents always bartering and making deals with the landlords in the various places we lived. One summer, when I was about 14, we moved to a suburb of the metro area we lived in, and my brother and I were going to have to change schools again. We dreaded always having to be the new kids making new friends. Sometimes we would become the popular kids, and other times we would be bullied. We were a little hopeful this time. We were moving back to a school district we lived in when we were in early elementary. Surely the kids would have changed, but at least we would know a few familiar faces. Our new home was a 2-story townhouse with 2 units. If you were facing the townhome, the 2 units were identical. Ours on the left, the landlord's on the right. The landlord had 3 kids our age. Yay, we were so excited to meet them. The first day as we're moving in, Matt comes over and introduces himself. I recognize him immediately from the first grade all those years ago. He was tall and thin with fuzzy red hair and a body full of freckles. He walked sort of hunched while swaying side to side. I remember him from first grade because he always seemed sort of off to me. He was in trouble a lot and had strange mannerisms that just made me feel uncomfortable to be around him. Today, he was wearing a t-shirt cut off at the sleeves and at the midriffs, so his belly, abdomen, and belly button were showing. This was the 80s, but still it was a weird outfit. Over the next couple of weeks, Matt develops a crush on me. Our parents are gone a lot, out doing whatever, and leave me and my brother, who was younger, home alone all the time. We'd be chilling watching TV in the living room, and suddenly Matt would appear with his face pressed against the screen door. Always some excuse and some reason to come in and play video games with my brother or something, always creeping me out. I told my parents, but they didn't care too much to rock the boat. After all, he was the landlord's son and they needed to be on good graces for all the future late rent and other BS they were about to put them through. Oh, and the landlord is a cop, so the whole family must be on the up and up. Wrong. Sometime later, I'm in my room listening to music, waiting for songs to come on the radio so I can record them, and playing with makeup and such. I go to my closet to get some clothes out and look to see the attic access, which is in my closet ceiling, is open. I'm quite sure I had not been up in the attic. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know we had an attic until I saw the square piece of wood in the ceiling of my closet move to the side. Of course, I freaked the heck out because right on the other side of my bedroom wall is Matt's room, so he must have had the attic access in his room as well. That's great. I tell my dad. He comes up to my room, goes into the attic, and sure enough, it's Matt's little creeper hair. There is a mattress, a few pairs of my panties, photos, and other belongings of mine that he obviously was sneaking into my room to acquire while we were gone. Or heck, maybe while I was even there. No idea. The aftermath wasn't so bad for him. I know my dad went next door and talked to the parents, but, gotta stay in good graces. I'm sure by this point we were already lagging in rent and other such details. I don't really remember much of a fuss being made about it, except for my brother telling him if he ever talks to me or looks at me, he would kick his ass. I think it's worth mentioning that while this story takes place in a Southeast Asian city with a population over 1.5 million, I didn't always live here. I was born and raised in a small town in the Midwestern United States. You know, the kind where everybody knows everyone and we only gain attention during an election year. Anyway, my parents and I made the big move in 2014 due to a number of reasons. The biggest one being so my mother could be with her family since this is her homeland. However, the town where all my relatives lives is about 8 hours away. We had to move to our city because it's the safest in the region for foreigners and my dad is pretty obviously white. Now, unlike every other college student in the world, I hadn't done much this summer. The heat was blistering all hours of the day and I didn't have money to spend even if I was willing to leave our air-conditioned apartment. The only thing enticing me to the outdoors were the incessant sounds of construction due to a new unit being added to our complex. However, leaving was obviously inevitable, so toward the end of the month, my parents and I went to buy groceries. The next day, my mom and I went to buy some things we had initially forgotten, and the day after that, the two of us went out again to pay some bills. That made 3 consecutive days of going out for the first time in literally a month. To say I was exhausted was an understatement. By 7 p.m. on the third night, I was already fast asleep on the living room couch. My mom woke up around 10 that same night and told me to head up to my room. I was too tired to do my entire night routine, so I quickly brushed my teeth and went upstairs. I noticed that my cat was already asleep in my bed, which happens once in a blue moon since he's basically my mom's shadow. So I got into bed while contorting myself at an angle that wouldn't disturb him. Cat lovers, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I turned on a dim light, plugged in my phone, and started playing a random YouTube video, then eventually fell asleep. I didn't know what time it was, but I awoke to the feeling of my bed shaking. I tend to ignore movements like this because they happen often when my cat sleeps with me, as he has a habit of scratching his ear. But there was a pretty strong earthquake just the night before, so I assumed it was another one, making me open my eyes and look down at my cat to see which of the two it was. Indeed, he was scratching his ear. Oh, and there was my mom at the foot of my bed. Nothing out of the ordinary. She was probably checking on me before she and my dad went out for their 5 a.m. walk, as routine, and was bending down to pet the cat. I closed my eyes and was just about to slip back into slumber when my half-asleep brain realized that a number of other things were indeed out of the ordinary. With eyes that were barely open, I looked at my mom with blurred vision. The first thing I noticed was that she was wearing one of my high school t-shirts. My mom and I are far from the same size and she doesn't have a history of borrowing my clothes. Weird but not unsettling. Maybe she ran out of clean exercise shirts and decided to use one of mine. I then noticed that she was wearing another one of my high school t-shirts, but this one was wrapped around her head in a weird way that outlined the shape of it, not covering anything but just framing the profile. In my periphery, I noticed that my closet doors were wide open. My mom always nagged me to close them, because she said it wasted the cool air coming from the air conditioner, so I made sure to keep them closed whenever I wasn't getting ready. Another random realization hit me when my brain finally registered the fact that while my mom does pet my cat when she comes in to check on me, she's never bent down like the person in my room was doing. Looking back now, I don't think I've ever seen her bend like that since I was a kid. Keep in mind, all these thoughts flooded my mind in about 5 seconds. Still, my half-asleep and half-stupid-as-heck brain was more focused on why my mom was wearing my clothes as opposed to all the things that were off in the situation. I sat up a bit and squinted my eyes so I could read the shirt since there was writing on the back that would help me distinguish if it was actually mine and not just one that looked like mine. That's when the person turned to look right at me before running out of my room, maintaining a weird crouching position that will be burned into my mind for the rest of my life. It wasn't until they were near the stairs that I fully processed what was happening. That person was not my mom. They weren't even a female. Instantly, I shot out of bed and instinctively wrapped my blanket around me to cover my night clothes that suddenly felt so revealing. It was only then I began screaming. I hesitantly followed him out of my room and watched as he ran down the wooden stairs with deafening steps that echoed throughout the 3rd floor, almost drowning out my piercing cry. If I was going to get my parents' attention, who were sleeping on the other side of a closed door on the 2nd floor, I needed to be louder. I stood at the foot of the stairs and pushed my lungs to their limit. I could practically feel the capacity stretch inside my ribcage. After what felt like ages but was probably only another 5 minutes, my parents' door swung open and my mom ran up the stairs with a panic-stricken expression that I will never forget. She grabbed me by the shoulders and shouted, "What? What's wrong?" I turned to look at her with my mouth agape and my brows furrowed in a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Had she not seen the man when he ran right past their bedroom door? It all happened so fast, I wasn't sure if they had crossed paths or not. "Someone's in the house," I responded, with a voice that I honestly didn't recognize. Without missing a beat, she wrapped her arm around me and ushered me down the stairs. "Grab the gun," she shouted in the country's native language. We ran into my parents' bedroom where my dad stood in the doorway with tired eyes and slumped posture. I pushed him into the room and turned around to close the door, simultaneously fiddling with the light switch so we weren't in complete darkness. My movements were shaky and spastic, causing my fingers to fumble and flicker the lights on and off before eventually being able to lock the door. "What are you doing?" my dad asked with a soft laugh as he switched on the light after my attempts proved to be futile. I turned to him with the same incredulous expression I had when looking at my mom. He had been standing in the doorway to his room in perfect view of the man running away, yet he seemed to be oblivious. "There's somebody in the house," I repeated, watching his face instantly drop at my words. With the door now locked, I turned to my parents and watched them silently, waiting for them to say or do something. For 19 years, they had taken care of me and catered to my every want and need. Now there they just stood, just as scared and defenseless as I was. In that moment, they were just people. My dad, an infamous Type A personality, kept his focus on the door, most likely processing the entire situation before deciding what to do next. My mother was the complete opposite. Her cell phone was in one hand while the other hand was running through her hair so many times that I was sure strands were going to end up in between her fingers. "I can't call the police. It's not working." I took the phone from her and dialed it myself, bringing the phone up to my ear only to hear a monotone voice say, "Sorry, but your balance is too low to make this call." In this country, most of the phones are prepaid, so if you don't have money on your account, you can't make any calls or texts. However, my mom said that she added money to her account just a few hours earlier. I tried calling my aunt who lives 8 hours away and it worked. It was then that I figured out that you can only use cell phones to call their cell phones and you can only use landlines to call their landlines, aka 911. The only problem was that our landline was in the second floor hallway, a few feet from the other side of the door. Once I told my parents what our only option was, my mom opened the window and began shouting for help in her native language, similar to a knee-jerk reaction. I instantly shut the window. "Don't do that. They'll know we're defenseless and they'll come back." At the time this happened, we had been in the room for about 40 minutes. I was convinced that if they had left and then heard her screaming, they would come back since they would know they were sitting ducks. "Are you sure that you saw someone? Maybe you're just dreaming." My dad said this, being his first string of words since barricading ourselves. How could he have gotten in? The door has 2 locks and a heavy pole across it. A little context about the pole. After the lock on our screen door broke, my mom had insisted on putting a metal pole across the door to ensure that no one would be able to get in. "No, I know what I saw," I answered without hesitation, but my brain started dissecting the possibility of the figure simply being a figment of my imagination. The sounds and movements he made were so vivid, but the situation as a whole seemed too surreal. There was no way someone could get inside with that pole acting as a shield, and neither of my parents had seen the man. Internally, even I wasn't 100% sure of myself at this point. But on the outside, I stuck to my guns. I saw a man. "Okay, then we need to get out of this room and call the police," my dad said restlessly. My overthinking got the best of me as I thought about us leaving the room. Were there more people? Were they waiting for us? Were they right outside the door? Or were they hiding and would spring out when we least expected it? Maybe they were still in our apartment continuing to raid through our things since they knew that we were too scared to leave. Had they heard my mom screaming for help and come back? We searched the room for weapons to protect ourselves with, but we wouldn't find anything even remotely useful. What happened to the gun that my mom was shouting for earlier, you ask? Well, it never existed. She just said that so the man would hopefully leave out of fear. So with a half pair of broken scissors in my dad's hand and a small floor fan in my mom's hand, we prepared ourselves for whatever was on the other side of the door. My dad unlocked the door and swung it open swiftly, hoping to catch anyone out there off guard. The complete silence mixed with the eerie yellow lighting coming from our hallway seemed like a scene in a horror movie. Straight ahead, we all noticed that the door to the second floor balcony was wide open and the screen on the window next to it had been pried open. The first feeling to run through me was assurance. Assurance of knowing that I wasn't crazy and that I hadn't made this up. The second feeling to run through me was pure dread, knowing that I wasn't crazy and I unfortunately hadn't made this up. We searched the second floor and found no one and nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. We then moved on to the first floor and found our pitcher of water dripping condensation on the kitchen table. My mom asked me if I had forgotten to put it back before I went to bed, but I distinctly remember only brushing my teeth. I knew I hadn't gotten it out. Our windows had the glass on the outside and the screen on the inside, contradictory to typical American windows, and we saw that the glass windows were wide open and the screen had been pried open. However, both of the locks on the door were bolted and the pull was still in place. We figured that the man had initially attempted to come in by putting his hand through the small gap he made in the screen window, trying to reach for the door so he could unlock it. However, I guess his calculations were off and he couldn't make the distance. That's when he climbed up to the second floor, probably by scaling the apartment that the construction workers had yet to finish, and did the same procedure to the balcony window. He was successful this time because the distance is much shorter. We called 911 a total of 5 times, and it took them around 45 minutes to get to our apartment, despite the fact that the police station is a 3-minute drive away. While waiting, my mom knocked on the other apartments to let them know what was going on. Now, our complex consists of 4 apartments, but I'd say it looks more like a paired home with 4 different sections. The first one is rented out to an online business company. The second is rented out to a family who had just moved in that exact night. We are in the third, and the fourth has no tenants. Neither of them answered, probably because who would answer the door at 2:30 a.m.? The police eventually came and told us that someone had made a call earlier, saying that they heard a woman screaming for help. My mom, but they couldn't find the location of the screams. They searched the house, but no one was found and didn't even tell us how to file a report. Yeah, it's just safe to say they were pretty useless. The next day, my mom talked to the people at the first apartment, and they were obviously shaken up. They told her that they had heard her knocking, but it's company policy to not open the door from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. My mom moved on to apartment 2 and told them what happened. The man and his pregnant wife said they didn't hear anything, despite going to bed at 2 a.m. and having their windows opened. I was somewhat skeptical because my mom's scream was pretty loud, even giving my mom's nightmares days after the incident. And all of our windows and second-story door were open. There's another building just a few feet away, so sound resonates pretty loudly, making the construction boom even behind closed doors. And my mother's screams that were loud enough for somebody to call the police. I was highly doubtful they didn't hear anything. With the first apartment, it made sense because they only used the first floor and all the windows were closed due to the air conditioning being on. My mom told the couple to be wary of the construction workers because she believed that they decided to rob us after seeing that my dad was a foreigner, automatically assuming that we were rich or something. The man's face instantly dropped and his tone turned cold. My mom asked him for the landlord's number since the old number didn't work anymore, and he said he would give it to her after he visited her today since he didn't have it on him. It took him 4 days to finally give us the number, and he did so with what seemed like a sincere apology, saying sorry for taking so long and for what happened to us. That same day, we called the landlord and she seemed shocked, telling us that nothing like this has ever happened in any of her apartments before. However, my mom had talked to a tenant in the apartment behind us, owned by the same landlord, and she said she knows of at least 3 people in her complex who have had their place broken into. Later, the maintenance man came to inspect our window, and we found out that the construction workers were hired because they're all members of our landlord's church, and the man who just moved in with his wife is the bishop of their church. Before my mom could even bring up her theory, the maintenance man told her that he was convinced that it was the construction workers. We kept realizing that things were missing over the course of 2 weeks, like my backpack, some sunglasses, money, jewelry, some stuff out of our storage room, and more. My phone was also taken. I assumed that when he was crouching over my bed, he was trying to reach for both the phone and the charger since I was probably lying on the wire or something. My laptop and the camera were both sitting on my desk, next to my jewelry box, but he didn't take them. My parents assume it's because he was going to take the heavier items when he was about to leave, so he wouldn't have to carry them around. However, I didn't see anything in his hands when he was running away from me, which makes me think that he either left the other items by the door for easy exit, or there was someone else in the house helping him. A few weird things. He took 4 of my shirts, 2 of them being exactly the same. He also went into my cousin's room and stole her towel. Thankfully, she had been gone for the summer, so she wasn't around, but it almost seemed as if the thief knew that. He went into our room and my room, but completely avoided my parents' room. I also couldn't get over the fact that he drank our water straight from the jug, which would have made sense since he climbed up the second story. However, this country is notorious for being superstitious, and my mom said that thieves tend to leave water out because it makes the homeowners go into a deep sleep, something about the water resembling the calming waves of an ocean. I've never been one to believe in superstition, and she thinks that's why I was able to wake up. Just a few hours after the incident, we decided that we're going to move back to the States. This wasn't the only occurrence affecting our decision, but it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm just thankful that we all came out safe and nothing worse happened. I'm also incredibly grateful for my cat, since he's basically the hero for waking me up. In fact, my cousins are fighting over who'll get to keep him once we leave. This happened to me a couple of months ago now, but when it first happened, given how crazy it was, it took me a few weeks to collect myself enough to type it up and post it. It's relevant for me to tell you that I'm a military veteran and I have PTSD and anxiety, as well as a pretty bad case of depression that I'm currently in my 3rd year of. I've read that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can massively improve PTSD symptoms and in turn help to reduce anxiety, so I've been trying various techniques at home. The problem there is my wife and I live in a small 2-bedroom ground floor flat with an upstairs neighbor with absolutely no concept of other people. A jock douchebag type who is a personal trainer, but he trains at home for gains. The kind of guy whose only 2 topics of conversation are protein powder and steamed rice. I'm sure you can imagine the type. Anyway, with that being a constant issue, meditation and quiet mindfulness are just not possible with the constant noise. My solution to this was to do my normal routine during the day, but take advantage of my insomnia later on. At around 11 p.m. to 12 a.m., I would put on my coat and my shoes, and as we lived near the beach, I figured I could walk to the beach now that there are pretty much no people around, walk on the sand, and be mindful of the sounds of the ocean. Sounds nice, right? It was the first 2 times, but you know what they say. The 3rd time's the charm. The walk to the beach from my home isn't that far, maybe a little over half a mile, but once I got there, I would walk to the very end of the beach until I reached the cliffs where there was a World War II artillery gun turret, which was another half-mile-ish. Sometimes I would walk the path up the cliff to the gun and stare out into the blackness of the midnight ocean, which was only broken by the occasional flash of light from the lighthouse. I would sit and listen to the waves crashing against the cliffs. Sometimes I would close my eyes and just concentrate on nothing but that sound. I felt really safe there, knowing I was alone, just me and the ocean. Usually before I turned tail and head home, I would walk down to a small row of benches. They're all marked with plaques in remembrance of someone who also came and enjoyed the view, although I imagine they came during the day. The benches are close to an old pub that was shut down years ago, and I had heard the place used to get used as a dogging site, or a brothel or something back in the day. So when I saw vehicle headlights coming towards the pub, I figured it was some young lads trying to catch potential doggers at it. I sat on the bench and waited for the car to pass me, but as it rounded a bend in the road further up, I was momentarily lit up by the headlamps. The headlamps of the vehicle went off immediately, and the car went off-road and out of sight for a moment. At this point, I was fully alert and a bit cautious, so I dropped to one knee and ducked behind the bench I had been sitting on. The vehicle drove past me. It was only maybe 40 feet from me, and as the lighthouse illuminated the vehicle, I could now see it was an old beat-up Land Rover kind of vehicle, with shitty camel paint on the wings. At that moment, someone popped out of the top of the vehicle, with a scoped rifle and a big torch. In that instant, my head I was back in Iraq, and my senses felt razor sharp. I dropped onto my belt buckle and crawled into a patch of long grass, adjacent to the benches, and then I got into a position where I could see them, but they couldn't see me. The guy with the rifle shone his torch at the exact bench I'd been sitting on, then the others searching for me. He started looking all around him through the scope, looking for where I might have gone. My heart was pounding so hard I felt as if they could hear it. I held my sleeve over my mouth to muffle the sound of my breathing, but more importantly, to try and hide the condensation of my breath. The vehicle started to move to get a better view of the branches, so I started slowly crawling towards the main road, as not only is there a row of houses, but also an old stone bus stop I could take hard cover in if they saw me and opened fire. After about 5 minutes of hiding in the long grass, it started to rain, and they were still clearly looking for me, but were now about 150 feet away. The guy with the rifle was scanning around with his eye down the scope, so I waited till he was looking away from me to seize my moment and run for cover. I pushed my hands hard into the wet dirt to launch myself onto my feet, and then I sprinted towards the bus stop while throwing some zigs and zags in there, just in case they had seen me. Luckily they hadn't, and I was now far enough away that I could take out my phone and call the police. They were there with a riot van and a squad car in about 10 minutes, and As I was talking to the officers in the van, they spotted the quote-unquote gunner's vehicle and took off after them. The officers in the squad car stayed behind to talk to me. The rain was coming down in sheets by now. They asked me if I was absolutely sure it was a rifle, and I told them yes, it was 100%. No doubt in my mind at all. The officers both looked at each other, and then one of them asked, "And what exactly is your experience with firearms?" I told them I was ex-Army and had seen my fair share of all kinds of firearms. They then asked me what I was doing there after midnight, which is a pretty fair question, to be honest. I explained that, quite ironically, I was taking a mindfulness walk to ease my PTSD symptoms. They were satisfied with that explanation, if not somewhat amused, and told me that the armed response unit was en route. I asked if they needed me to stay behind and make a statement, but the officer told me to not bother waiting around because they most likely wouldn't need to take a statement beyond the call I made, and also it was pissing down with rain, so I should get home and get dry. It was over, but I still felt super wired, and my heart was still thumping hard in my chest. I started the walk home, and when I was about halfway there, a police helicopter buzzed overhead and settled over the area where I had been sitting on the benches, with the searchlight going. It was right then it hit me like a shotgun blast to the chest. That happened. That was effing real, and it was here. What the heck? My head started swimming, and my heart was pounding twice as hard now, and my legs felt like jelly, and my lungs felt glitchy, if you will. I couldn't breathe properly. I dropped to my knees, crying in the street in the pouring rain, the only light coming in from a nearby street lamp with a flickering bulb. I was gasping for breath, thoughts flashing in my head, thinking that if I had stayed still, if I hadn't hunched behind the bench, if I had done any number of things differently or hadn't, then I could have gurgled my last breath alone in the dark and the cold, wet dirt, and my wife would be none the wiser till the following day. I have no idea if they were even there for me, and if they were, how could they know I'd be there? I've been twice before, I suppose. It's not like there are animals to hunt beyond foxes. But why hunt foxes from a vehicle with a rifle and a torch at midnight? Anyways, I'm not ashamed to say that the experience terrified me. I guess my army training helped me stay alert and to stay hidden, but I don't really know. I don't go walking at night anymore, and I have the occasional nightmare about the whole thing. I work at a large crafting store in California and have been there for a year and 8 months now. A little background before I explain what's been going on is needed. So last year, we hired a guy we'll name Hayden. Hayden was a little quiet on the first day, but quickly became more talkative, and over the next couple of weeks started to never stop talking. He would constantly say weird stuff. For instance, one day he was put in charge of building furniture. Our store carries stuff like furniture and home decor as well. He was apparently having difficulty assembling the table he was working on and said something about cutting someone up if he couldn't figure out how to put it together. Another time we were both working in the stockroom, and he kept talking about how much he looked like the Parkland shooter, Nicholas Cruz. I'll admit he did in fact look like that kid, which was creepy in of itself. I remember one day I'd gotten off work and was waiting for my ride to pick me up when, out of nowhere, Hayden walked up behind me. He just stood there with an awkward smile on his face, and I politely asked him, "What's up?" He said something to the effect of, "Oh, nothing much. Just enjoying my lunch break. I'm thinking about going inside Taco Bell, right across from the parking lot from our work, and shanking someone." He pretty much laughed and said he was joking after saying that. When my wife picked me up, we saw him walking towards the Taco Bell and just flashing us this creepy ear-to-ear smile. So the last straw for me was when he and I were assigned to work for our spring freight and get it loaded up on a large U-boat. Our shift started at 7 a.m. and was over at noon. It was 11 o'clock and we still hadn't finished our task because Hayden just wouldn't stop goofing around. He would also work very slowly on purpose and would only take one item to the U-boat at once. Our boss came to where we were working and was upset that we weren't done yet. He told us we were both getting written up if the job wasn't finished before we were off. I was mad at this point and Hayden knew it. He seemed to feel bad for pretty much getting me in trouble and apologized. He then said something that really concerned me. He said in the most serious tone I'd ever heard him speak in since meeting him, "If I get fired, I'll shoot this place up." He went on to say that he knew where all the emergency exits were and would first shoot all the cashiers and then move on to the employees in the store. I'll admit that I didn't immediately report what he said, but it did have me on edge and I kept thinking about what if. After some convincing from my wife, I finally did the right thing and informed my manager. They took a written report from me and contacted the police. After 2 more days of working with Hayden, he was fired and subsequently arrested for his threats. This week after getting arrested, my boss held a meeting with the entire staff and told everyone what happened. After everyone left the meeting, he pulled me aside and revealed to me what the police and Hayden talked about during the interrogation. I don't completely remember what was said, but Hayden apparently admitted that he said what he said and kept asking if I had been the one who reported him. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. I was working at the same store. Still am, by the way, and I was heading to the break room for my final break when I heard a voice from one of the aisles to the left. A man was standing next to the paint case and asked if I could get him some paint. While I was opening the case, he addressed me by my name, which I immediately thought was weird because I wasn't wearing my name tag on this particular day. Out of curiosity, I asked him how he knew my name, and he said it was just a lucky guess, to which I thought was BS, mainly because his tone of voice seemed sarcastic. The entire time I was getting his paint, he was staring at me with a smile on his face. He then began to ask me questions about my name, which is the same name as a very popular TV show character. He asked me what year I was born, why my parents decided to give me that name, etc. At this point, I started to walk away as I had other things to do, but the whole time I was walking away, he was trying to talk to me still. I heard him yelling my name from 3 aisles down. I went in and stood in the warehouse until I thought he was gone. Later that day, one of my coworkers asked me if I knew the guy who was buying the paint, and I told her I didn't. She told me that he had approached her and asked her all kinds of questions about me, like if I'm a good worker and if she likes me as a coworker. This is an ongoing issue too, as he's come in the store 2 other times, one being yesterday during my day off and apparently asked where I was. I don't know for sure, but I suspect that this guy might be cousins with Hayden as they sort of look alike and have similar mannerisms, but look similar to the Parkland shooter and have that same creepy vibe. This might not be the scariest thing out here, but it's still freaky. This happened to me in 1970 when I was 11 and a half years old. My 2 brothers and I have always had to walk to and from grade school each day for 8 years. Since they didn't have a bus for our area, this was quite a distance away, and there's no way in current times there wouldn't have been a bus for our grade school days. We were the last house on the right in a very small subdivision on a dead-end street. Next to us was a ginormous cornfield with an old barn and house and a lot of acres of fruit trees and woods. As a shortcut, I would take this deserted woods trail and follow it to what would lead me to my house after about 15 minutes. That particular day, I turned right into the woods and the trail, as I had done every year for 6 years by then. It was the end of winter, and I still had my long blue winter coat on. I'd walked about 5 minutes on the trail, and for some reason just happened to look behind me. Quite a distance away, I walked pretty fast. I saw a man enter the woods and was on the trail I was on. No one else was around, and for some reason I started walking faster, thinking I was just being silly. When I looked behind me, I saw the man also begin to pick up pace. This scared me, and I really started walking fast. I saw he was too when I again glanced over my shoulder. I still don't know why, but that day I felt fear, so I began running and noticed he too was running. I was really afraid, then I no longer had the time to glance behind me. I broke into a full run as fast as I could until I came out on the road in front of my house. Normally I walk the trail a bit further and end up at our garage and back door, but that day I sprinted into where our little street on the dead end began, and that brought me right in front of our house. I didn't want him to know I lived there, so at that point I stopped and was catching my breath. He was only maybe 10 to 15 seconds behind me and he caught up with me, but he didn't stop. As he kept a much slower pace then, he looked at me and said, "You're a fast runner." He kept going. I stayed where I was until I couldn't see him anymore, and then I turned into our driveway. For months after that, I would take a different way home and didn't walk those trails again for some time. I don't know if I was just being paranoid, but why else would a young man, he was maybe 18 or so, very young, begin running after me for a good 10 minutes like that? He scared the heck out of me. It's a good thing I was indeed a very fast runner, or who knows what might have happened on that deserted woods trail. I'm almost 63 now and can't run like that anymore. So this happened when I was in 7th grade, a 12-year-old. At the time, it was just my mom, my brother, and I living in a rental in a rundown low-income area. We moved in during the summer before the school year started and were welcomed by our next-door neighbors, which wasn't too uncommon but not super common at the time for that area in Oregon. My mom worked 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day, so my little brother and I would ride the bus home every day from school. My cousin would also sometimes ride back to my house with us, and her parents would pick her up later. One day when I came home, I noticed our only small laptop we owned was gone off the counter. I figured my mom had moved it. Later, when my mom came home, we determined it was missing and that a lot of other things were missing, like my iPod and wallet and my mom's safe with her handgun in it, and lots of family valuables. We called the cops and reported a robbery, and they came to investigate. They determined the person probably slid through the doggy door, leading into the garage, and then entered through the house from the unlocked garage door. The cops stayed in their cars on the curb all night and said they would stay on watch for our house more than normal. I was terrified all night, and my brother and I slept in my mom's room. The next day, we locked all of our doors. It was Wednesday and was a random half day at my school, so I rode the bus home around noon, and my cousin came with, while my brother went to a friend's house for the afternoon to hang out. I used the key under the mat my mom leaves for me, and my cousin and I hung out for about another hour or two until her mom came and picked her up. After she left, I heard the doorknob of the closet right next to the front door slowly open, and out came this skinny, what looked like a 35-year-old man that I recognized as our next-door neighbor. He seemed to be constantly shaking, intense eyes, and had a really unhealthy look to him because of extremely sunken-in face. Terrified, I'm in the living room just standing, looking at him while he looks at me with a surprised look. I think he thought everyone left when my cousin did, until his face changed to an amused smirk when I believe he realized that I was alone in the house. He begins to walk towards me, while I stand there shocked, not sure what to do. He grabs me really hard on the shoulders and tells me I'm pretty. He then begins to pull me into him, to, I think, lick me. I don't know, he seemed crazy and excitable with his intense eyes. I instinctively jump and buckle my knees to allow my full weight to be the force that rips me from his grips and fall on my butt. He then bends down for me when I heel kick him in his nuts and as hard as I can, at that. Note, I played soccer at the time and practiced wrestling with older neighbor kids a lot. He then yells and falls to his knees, cupping himself. I use that time to run past him to my front door. I open it and run to a kid I rode the bus with's house, about 6 houses down or so. He and his mom were there, and she called the cops and my mom while we waited. The cops got to the house, and he wasn't there but had managed to steal a few more small valuables. I gave my testimony that I was our next-door neighbor, and he was later caught that same day, selling some of our stuff at the pawn shop in town. He ended up being a crystal meth addict, stealing our stuff to sell and pay for his addiction. He was super weak from all the drug use, which is probably why I was able to get away from him. He was also apparently somewhat high, which he claimed heightened him sexually, which is why he spontaneously decided to attack me, being that I was alone. Also, though he looked like he was in his mid-30s, he was only 26. He had apparently watched us for a few months, learning our schedules for when we left and got home. He took the time to take the key from under the doormat while we were gone, get a copy, and then put the original back under the mat for my brother and me to use when we got home. The cops were surprised he was smart enough to do that, as he seemed to be mostly dim-witted with everything else due to the drug abuse. Either way, I testified against his physical attack, and he got a few decades of jail time, believe it or not, being that he was already on parole for drugs and stuff. I was terrified and slept in my mom's room for the next year. So I grew up in West Texas, and if you know anything about living in a small town as I did, you know that everyone knows everyone. And of course this was true for my community, all but my next door neighbors. Now I say next door, but what I really mean is that they were a ways away. We lived on a farm, and our neighbors were down the creek around 500 feet. They were somewhat a mysterious group. It was a wife, a man, and his 2 kids. They stayed mostly to themselves, occasionally driving their old Chevrolet pickup down the old gravel road, weekly to go to the general store. There were a few trees between the property lines separating us from them, but in my bedroom, if I lay on my bed a certain way, I could see the far-off light coming from their back porch. Now for the scary bit. It was late, around 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. Me being around 10 at the time, I love to stay up late and read science fiction. So I'm sitting there reading my novel, everyone else is asleep, and I see an abnormal light coming from where I would see the neighbor's porch usually. I thought nothing of it and went back to reading. Minutes later, I hear chanting. Now I'm freaking out. In our area, you never hear anything like this, and I certainly have never heard it before. That is when I should have woken up my papa, but being a stupid kid, I ran to get a better look through the kitchen window. What I saw next frightened me beyond belief. Standing there in my neighbor's yard was a group of around 6 men with all white robes circling a burning cross. The way the light hit their clothing and the embers coming off, All of it scared me to death. I ran to get my papa. He got quite a scare also from me abruptly waking him. He immediately grabbed the shotgun at his side. I ran to show him what I had found. He called the sheriff, and around 10 minutes later, he showed up at their door. He said he couldn't do anything about it and that they had the freedom to do what they wanted, so we just had to deal with it. It stopped around dawn. I got no sleep that night and for the next few nights. A week later, a letter showed up at our door and I distinctly remember what it said. In Latin translates to, "We are watching." Let me set the scene. It's late summer, I am 18, and I had just recently moved 2 hours away from home to attend university. My course is a fairly niche one, prehistory and archaeology, so there aren't really that many students, maybe 50, who start the course every year. I have pretty severe anxiety, to the point where I'd be unable to just talk to strangers, so making new friends is hard for me. A few weeks into the semester, a guy starts to sit next to me in our shared classes. He introduces himself to me as Michael and tells me he's 32. I'm not judgmental at all, and I think it's great when people who are a bit older decide to go back to university, but this guy clearly looks like he's in his 40s. A bit weird, I think to myself, but whatever. I'm just glad I'm not the weird girl who never talks to anyone in class anymore. We talk a bit, and after class, on my way out of the building, I put my headphones on when he taps my shoulder. I hate when strangers touch me, by the way, and asked me what song I was listening to. I told him, and he immediately goes, "Oh, that's the band with the sexy lead singer who always wears lingerie, right?" And I'm just like, yeah, in a pretty hesitant tone, because that comment felt really weird. He continues by asking me what I was up to now, and I tell him I'm on my way to get coffee before my next class an hour later, and he just invites himself to join me. So we get on the tram to go to the place where I get my coffee, and he keeps recommending me music to listen to. All heavy metal bands, which I'm absolutely not into and never implied I was, so I guess he just assumed because my hair was dyed red at the time and I like dark clothes and makeup. As we got to the coffee place, we ordered and he insisted on paying for my coffee, and as we waited for our drinks, he asked me for my phone number. I don't ever give my number to people I don't know, and the whole thing made me really uncomfortable as at that point, he started to stand closer to me. Again, really uncomfortable, and my anxiety brain starts to ring all the alarm bells. He hands me his phone, my name already in there, just waiting for my number. Panicked, I put in my number, pretty sure he'd be the kind of guy who tried to call me to make sure I didn't give him a wrong number, and surprise, he did that. Please don't ever do that, people. When someone gives you a wrong number, they aren't into you, but don't feel comfortable saying no. I go to the uni building my next class is in, and he follows me there too. He didn't have class there. He just wanted to show off his car to impress me. I'm like 40 minutes early for my class, but at this point, I'm so uncomfortable around this guy that I'm just happy to have a reason to leave. As I'm telling him I'm off, he goes in for a hug and kisses me on the cheek. I basically just give an awkward laugh and run off. After this, he would text me a couple of times. Just pointless stuff and some pretty racist, completely random memes, honestly. I tried to avoid him as much as possible, starting to skip classes I knew he was coming in or coming late, so I could get a seat as far away from him as possible and close to the door, so I could leave quickly. After I made a couple of friends by just inserting myself into an already existing friend group, we started to realize he had pulled this stuff on several girls and made many of us super uncomfortable. He was reported to the uni for being a creep. They didn't do anything, and he also turned out to be a complete nutjob when he held presentations and seminars and argued with professors after they told him how wrong he was about basically everything. He ended up telling a friend of mine about his BDSM fantasies, which, no issue with that in general, but a 40-something-year-old dude randomly starting to tell that to a 20-year-old girl is beyond creepy. We had to work on an excavation site for a month of the summer, and everyone who worked with him said he was a horrible man-child. And he called a male colleague super fat and ugly, which resulted in him getting a warning from the uni. Interesting how that he had consequences, but all the complaints from girls didn't. He ultimately was expelled when he called the department head a Nazi for not taking him on an excursion that was already full. I did sadly see him again after that when I was sitting on a park bench in front of uni. I hoped he wouldn't recognize me as I had dyed my hair green by that point, but nope. He walked up to me and asked how I was doing. I absolutely terrified of him after hearing everyone else's stories. A friend hitched a ride from him once, and he kept resting his hand on her thigh. Just said I had to get to my class and left. I just got off work. Today I work 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. Around 10:45, a man walks in. I've had previous odd encounters with this man, such as seeing him walk behind me in my neighborhood and him hanging out near my street. I had brushed those off since I live right next to where I work and figured he lived there also, but always kept an eye on him. Anyway, the man comes in and orders his usual pastry. I work at a bakery and tells me I'm going to stay inside and eat my pastry. For anyone who doesn't know, my county is currently under lockdown because of the coronavirus and all dining indoors is strictly prohibited. Not to mention my bakery is tiny and there have never been any tables to sit at inside anyways. Only a coffee bar that has never had space to sit. I tell him, "We're on lockdown. You can't really eat inside." His response chills me. "Are you alone here?" "Yes." I respond stupidly but quickly try to catch myself. "But my coworker will be here soon." A complete lie. It's only about 11 a.m. and my coworker isn't scheduled till 1 p.m. when I'm off. Then no one will see me in here. He responds and goes back to eating his pastry at the coffee counter. I roll my eyes and get back to work, not getting paid enough to care if he quickly eats his pastry and leaves. 10 minutes pass, then 15. This guy is still in my bakery. I look over and he's finished his pastry and has moved closer to the open space in the counter meant for employees to walk back and forth between the front of the store into the employees only side. Now I'm starting to get uncomfortable. I quickly text my coworker, a 30-year-old man who owns a lot of guns and treats me like his little sister. 911. I look over again and now the man is even closer and is now reading a book. He's putting the book in front of his face and peeking at me from above it, watching me. Multiple customers come in and out during his stay. Every time I turn my back to him, he gets closer and closer, until eventually he is halfway in our employee-only area. I begin frantically texting my coworker. He tells me he's about 4 minutes away. I finally make the decision to text my boyfriend. I had avoided doing so to keep from scaring him, but now I was terrified. I sat in the back of the employee area watching this guy. I held the knife just in case he decided to come any closer. Just as he takes a step closer, my coworker bursts through the door. Confrontation ensues, and the man leaves the shop but continues to sit in his parked car, right out in front, and stares at me. I tell my coworker about the previous experiences I've had with him, and he's had enough. He marches out to the guy's car and tells him the next time he comes around, it will be his last. My boyfriend pulls up at this point and joins in with the warnings. This happened to me a long time ago, but I think about it from time to time, and I've used this story to teach my kids to never open the door for people they don't know. I was a kid, and we lived in a really big old house that was part of an old farm. It was on a semi-busy road that was rural. The house was really big and had a larger formal living room, with a large formal dining room right behind it. There was a big double front door that opened to a covered porch and a side door that went into the dining room. My mom was doing laundry in the very back of the house, and I was watching TV in the living room. There was a knock at the side door. I wasn't supposed to open the door, but I figured I could peek and see. I looked through the curtain on the side door and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the Easter Bunny. Of course, looking back now, I know it was a guy in a costume, but back then I thought it was real. When he saw me, he did a little hop and asked me to let him in. I was kind of in shock and just stared at him. He was in a pink suit and had a basket with eggs in it on his arm. He knocked again and acted really impatient. He said, "Excuse me, are you going to let me in so I can hide these eggs for you?" Man, I wanted those eggs, but he was a stranger, right? But he was the Easter Bunny. Can the Easter Bunny really be a stranger? So I asked him who he was. He sighed and said, "I'm the Easter Bunny, of course, and you have to let me in right now so I can hide these eggs. Invite me in, you have to, or you won't get any." I reached out to unlock the door, but then I got a sick feeling at my stomach and decided I should probably check with my mom first. So I told him I was going to ask my mom, and he said, "No, you have to invite me in. I'm only here to see you, and these are only for you." I thought about it, and he started to freak me out, so I yelled for my mom and ran to tell her. So I run back to the laundry room and tell my mom there's a big Easter Bunny at the front door, and he wants to come in the house. My mom laughs and says, "Well, let me go see." So she walks to the front door, and of course the bunny is gone. Like no trace of him whatsoever. My mom thinks I'm a big fat fibber and made me sit on the couch and think about being a liar. Hours later, my dad comes home from work and he tells my mom there was a robbery a couple miles away. A little boy had opened the door and a man had tied up him and his mom and robbed them. I found out years later that the guy had beaten up the mom pretty bad. There was no mention of a bunny suit, but what better way to get a kid to let you in? That was strike one for that house.